All right, chapter 4. Looking at a king's mouth, said an old man, one would think he'd never sucked at his mother's breast. He was talking about Okonkwo, who had risen so suddenly from great poverty and misfortune to be one of the lords of the clan. The old man bore no ill will towards Okonkwo. Indeed, he respected him for his industry and success, but he was struck, as most people were, by Okonkwo's brusqueness in dealing with less successful men. Only a week ago, a man had contradicted him at a kindred meeting, which they held to discuss the next ancestral feast. Without looking at the man, Okonkwo had said, "This meeting is for men." The man who had contradicted him had no titles. That is why he had called him a woman. Okonkwo knew how to kill a man's spirit. Everyone at the kindred meeting took sides with Osugo when Okonkwo called him a woman. The oldest man present said sternly that those whose palm kernels were cracked for them by benevolent spirits should not forget to be humble. Okonkwo said he was sorry for what he had said, and the meeting continued. But it was really not true that Okonkwo's palm kernel had been cracked before him by a benevolent spirit. He had cracked them himself. Anyone who knew his grim struggle against poverty and misfortune could not say he had been lucky. If ever a man deserved his success, that man was Okonkwo. At an early age, he had achieved fame as the greatest wrestler in all the land. That was not luck. At the most, one could say that his chi or personal god was good. But Igbo people have a proverb that says, or that when a man says yes, his chi says yes also. Okonkwo said yes very strongly, so his chi agreed. And not only his chi, but his clan too, because it judged a man by the work of his hands. That is why Okonkwo had been chosen by the 9 villages to carry a message of war to their enemies, unless they agreed to give up a young man and a virgin to atone for the murder of Udo's wife. And such was the deep fear that their enemies had for Umuofia that they treated Okonkwo like a king and brought him a virgin who was given to Udo as wife, and the lad Ikemefuna. The elders of the clan had decided that Ikemefuna should be in Okonkwo's care for a while, but no one thought it would be as long as 3 years. They seemed to forget all about him as soon as they had taken the decision. At first, Ikemefuna was very much afraid. Once or twice he tried to run away, but he did not know where to begin. He thought of his mother and his 3-year-old sister and wept bitterly. Noi, his mother, was very kind to him and treated him as one of her own children. But all he said was, "When shall I go home?" When Okonkwo heard that he would not eat any food, he came into the hut with a big stick in his hand and stood over him while he swallowed his yams, trembling. A few moments later, he went behind the hut and began to vomit painfully. Noi's mother went to him and placed her hands on his chest and on his back. He was ill for 3 market weeks, and when he recovered, he seemed to have overcome his great fear and sadness. He was by nature a very lively boy, and he gradually became popular in Okonkwo's household, especially with the children. Okonkwo's son Nwoye, who was 2 years younger, became quite inseparable from him because he seemed to know everything. He could fashion out flutes from bamboo stems and even from the elephant grass. He knew the names of all the birds and could set clever traps for the little bush rodents. And he knew which trees made the strongest bows. Even Okonkwo himself became very fond of the boy, inwardly, of course. Okonkwo never showed any emotion openly, unless it be the emotion of anger. To show affection was a sign of weakness. The only thing worth demonstrating was strength. Therefore, he treated Ikemefuna as he treated everybody else, with a heavy hand. But there was no doubt that he liked the boy. Sometimes he went to big village meetings or communal ancestral feasts. He allowed Ikemefuna to accompany him like a son, carrying his stool in his goatskin bag. And indeed, Ikemefuna called him father. Ikemefuna came to Umuofia at the end of the carefree season between harvest and planting. In fact, he recovered from his illness only a few days before the week of peace began. And that was also the year Okonkwo broke the peace and was punished, as was the custom, by Ezeani, the priest of the earth goddess. Okonkwo was provoked to justifiable anger by his youngest wife, who went to plait her hair at her friend's house and did not return early enough to cook the afternoon meal. Okonkwo did not know at first that she was not at home. After waiting in vain for her dish, he went to her hut to see what she was doing. There was nobody in the hut, and the fireplace was cold. "Where is Ojiugo?" he asked the second wife, who came out of her hut to draw water from a gigantic pot in the shade of a small tree in the middle of the compound. "She's gone to plait her hair." Okonkwo bit his lips in anger as anger welled up within him. "Where are her children? Did she take them?" he asked with unusual coolness and restraint. "They are here," answered his first wife, Noi, his mother. Okonkwo bent down and looked into her hut. Ojiugo's children were eating with the children of his first wife. Did she ask you to feed them before she went? Yes, lied Nwoye's mother, trying to minimize Ojiugo's thoughtlessness. Okonkwo knew she was not speaking the truth. He walked back to his obi to await Ojiugo's return. And when she returned, he beat her very heavily. In his anger, he had forgotten that it was the week of peace. His first two wives ran out in great alarm, pleading with him that it was the sacred week. But Okonkwo was not the man to stop beating somebody halfway through, not even for fear of a goddess. Okonkwo's neighbors heard his wife crying and sent their voices over the compound walls to ask what was the matter. Some of them came over to see for themselves. It was unheard of to beat somebody during the sacred week. Before it was dusk, Ezeani, who was the priest of the earth goddess Ani, called on Okonkwo in his obi. Okonkwo brought out kola nut and placed it before the priest. Take away your kola nut. I shall not eat in the house of a man who has no respect for our gods and ancestors. Okonkwo tried to explain to him that what his wife had done, but Ezeani seemed to pay no attention. He held a short staff in his hand, which he brought down on the floor to emphasize his points. Listen to me, he said when Okonkwo had spoken. You are not a stranger in Umuofia. You know as well as I do that our forefathers ordained that before we plant any crops in the earth, we should observe a week in which a man does not say a harsh word to his neighbor. We live in peace with our fellows to honor our great goddess of the earth, without whose blessing our crops will not grow. You have committed a great evil. He brought down his staff heavily on the floor. Your wife was at fault, but even if you came into your obi and found her lover on top of her, you still would have committed a great evil to beat her. His staff came down again. The evil you have done can ruin the whole clan. The earth goddess whom you have insulted may refuse to give us her increase, and we shall all perish. His tone now changed from anger to command. You will bring to the shrine of Ani tomorrow 1 she-goat, 1 hen, a length of cloth, and 100 cowries. He rose and left the hut. Okonkwo did as the priest said. He also took with him a pot of palm wine. Inwardly he was repentant, but he was not the man to go about telling his neighbors that he was in error. And so people said he had no respect for the gods of the clan. His enemies said that his good fortune had gone to his head. They called him the little bird Nza, who so far forgot himself after a heavy meal that he challenged his chi. No work was done during the week of peace. People called on their neighbors and drank palm wine. This year they talked of nothing else but the Nsoani which Okonkwo had committed. It was the first time for many years that a man had broken the sacred peace. Even the oldest men could only remember 1 or 2 other occasions somewhere in the dim past. Ogbuefi Ezeudu was the oldest man in the village, who was telling 2 other men who came to visit him that the punishment for breaking the peace of Ani had become very mild in their clan. It has not always been so, he said. My father told me that he had been told that in the past, the man who broke the peace was dragged on the ground through the village until he died. But after a while, this custom was stopped because it spoiled the peace which it was meant to preserve. Somebody told me yesterday, said one of the younger men, that in some clans it is an abomination for a man to die during the week of peace. Indeed, it is true, said Ogbuefi Ezeudu. They have that custom in Obodoani. If a man dies at this time, he is not buried but cast into the evil forest. It is a bad custom which these people observe because they lack understanding. They throw away large numbers of men and women without burial. And what is the result? Their clan is full of evil spirits of these unburied dead, hungry to do harm to the living. After the week of peace, every man in his family began to clear the bush to make new farms. The cut bush was left to dry, and fire was then set to it. As the smoke rose into the sky, kites appeared from different directions and hovered over the burning field in silent valediction. The rainy season was approaching, when they would go away until the dry season returned. Okonkwo spent the next few days preparing his seed yams. He looked at each yam carefully to see whether it was good for sowing. Sometimes he decided that a yam was too big to be sown as one seed, and he split it deftly along its length with his sharp knife. His eldest son Nwoye and Ikemefuna helped him by fetching the yams in long baskets from the barn and in counting the prepared seeds in groups of 400. Sometimes Okonkwo gave them a few yams each to prepare, but he always found fault with their effort, and he said so with much threatening. Do you think you are cutting up yams for cooking? He asked Nwoye. If you split another yam of this size, I shall break your jaw. You think you are still a child. I began to own a farm at your age. And you, he said to Ikemefuna, do you not grow grow yams where you come from?" Inwardly, Okonkwo knew that the boys were still too young to understand fully the difficult art of preparing seed yams. But he thought that one could not begin too early. Seed yams stood for manliness, or yams stood for manliness, and he who could not feed his family on yams from one harvest to another was a very great man indeed. Okonkwo wanted his son to be a great farmer and a great man. He would stamp out the disquieting signs of laziness, which he thought he already saw in him. "I will not have a son who cannot hold up his head in the gathering of the clan. I would soon strangle him with my own hands. And if you stand staring at me like that," he swore, "Amadiora will break your head for you." Some days later, when the land had been moistened by 2 or 3 heavy rains, Okonkwo and his family went to the farm with baskets of seed yams, their hoes and machetes, and the planting began. They made single mounds of earth in straight lines all over the field and sowed the yams in them. Yam, the king of the crops, was a very exacting king. For 3 or 4 moons, it demanded hard work and constant attention from cockcrow till the chickens went back to roost. The young tendrils were protected from earth heat with rings of sisal leaves. As the rains became heavier, the women planted maize, melons, and beans between the yam mounds. The yams were then staked, first with little sticks and later with tall and big tree branches. The women weeded the farm 3 times at definite periods of the life of the yams, neither early nor late. And now the rains had really come, so heavy and persistent that even the village rainmaker no longer claimed to be able to intervene. He could not stop the rain now, just as he would not attempt to start it in its heat in the heart of the dry season without serious danger to his own health. The personal dynamism required to counter the forces of these extreme weather would be far too great for a human frame. And so nature was not interfered in the middle of the rainy season. Sometimes it poured down in such thick sheets of water that earth and sky seemed to merge into one gray wetness. It was then uncertain whether the low rumbling of Amadiora's thunder came from above or below. At such times, in each of the countless thatch huts of Umuofia, children sat around their mother's cooking fire, telling stories, or with their father in his obi, warming themselves from a log fire, roasting and eating maize. It was a brief resting period between the exacting and arduous planting season and the equally exacting but light-hearted month of the harvest. Ikemefuna had begun to feel like a member of Okonkwo's family. He still thought about his mother, his 3-year-old sister, and he had moments of sadness and depression. But he and Nwoye had become so deeply attached to each other that such moments became less frequent and less poignant. Ikemefuna had an endless stock of folk tales. Even those which Nwoye knew already were told with a new freshness and the local flavor of a different clan. Nwoye remembered this period very vividly till the end of his life, and he even remembered how he had laughed when Ikemefuna told him that the proper name for a corn cob with only a few scattered grains was Eze Agadi Nwayi, or teeth of an old woman. Nwoye's mind had gone immediately to Nwakiei, who lived near the Udala tree. She had about 3 teeth and was always smoking her pipe. Gradually, the rains became lighter and less frequent, and earth and sky once again became separate. The rain fell thin, slanting showers through sunshine and quiet breeze. Children no longer stayed indoors but ran about singing, "The rain is falling, the sun is shining, alone Nandi is cooking and eating." Nwoye always remembered who Nandi was and why he should live all by himself, cooking and eating. In the end, he decided that Nandi must live in that land. It became Efuna's favorite story, that the ant holds his court in splendor and the sands dance forever.